So we are now streaming the discussion following the panel on understanding anti-Semitism, and thanks to those of you who've decided to join us for the discussion. We figure we'll be able to discuss till about 7 o'clock. We know people are starting to get fatigued, and we don't want to wear out our welcome, but we also know that a lot of people came to this panel with questions, and we might not have been able to answer all of the questions about 2 millennia of anti-Semitism in our roughly 1 hour of comments. So yeah, I'd like to just invite you to raise questions, make additional comments, and just again, as a reminder of the introductions, I'm Lisa Heineman from the Department of History, Rabbi Hugenholtz from Agudas Achim, and Rob Cargill from the Department of Religious Studies. And we're very happy to have a group that wants to discuss.
My name is Mark Priest. I'm a Lutheran scholar, retired Lutheran pastor. I'm so grateful that Dr. Cargill brought to light Luther's writing against the Jews. Following World War II, Lutherans were horrified about what had happened with those writings. And so the Lutheran World Federation, based in Geneva, renounced those writings. The LaCusa, Lutheran Church United States and America, added renunciation to that. I think you'll find that the Lutheran churches in Iowa City are friends of this mission. I said to Rabbi Hugenholtz when I came in, we're going to get this, which is, it's huge, but we are going to get this. It's just got to stop. I asked to be preemptive because I have a 7 o'clock appointment tonight. I'm so glad all of you are here and you continue the conversation.
Thank you so much.
And this really is the attitude of every Lutheran I know, and that is, with, I always, when I teach my courses, I always say religion is a hammer. The analogy, and you can build beautiful things, and you can also do very destructive things with a hammer. And for the many things that Martin Luther did to bring attention to some of the problems with the religious tradition at the time, he was also a product of his time. And so, we had a discussion in my class this morning about the founding fathers of the United States, and we idolized them, we put them on coins, but they also had many problems, owning slaves and things like that. And so, Luther was a product of his times. All the Lutherans that I know and would know to discern between the good and the bad, and renounce that. And so this is also a hermeneutic device with the way that most of the Christians that I know, read the Bible. And that is the way that most Jews, Reformed Jews, read the Bible. And that is, there are a lot of terrible things, both in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. And there ought to be a way to say, yeah, I know it says that, endorsements of slavery and the subjugation of women, but we don't do that anymore. And religions evolve over time, and we don't do that anymore. And it is only the ultra fundamentalists in all religions, that say, I refuse to accept that the religion has evolved 2,000 years, 2,500 years, 1,400 years.
Which is also a very modern response, ironically.
Right. It's a very modern thing. And so thank you. Thank you for bringing attention to that.
God bless us, everyone.
Thank you. Amen.
Other questions?
Other questions?
Comments?
I'm Connie Berman. I'm one of 2 mothers of children who live near Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And I want to commend you, first of all, for making it much more clear that I had gotten it from the news coverage how much this was conspiracy theory. I think that has not come out in sort of the mainstream media that I have seen. But I think my bigger question is, what do we do now? How do we keep them safe? How do we keep other people's kids safe in other communities? And what
You want to take a shot at that one?
Take a shot.
The rabbi's going to help us out here.
So, I have the European model as an example in some cases of what to do and in some cases of not what to do, in the sense that the European Jewish community is a deeply and profoundly traumatized community for very obvious reasons because of the Shoah. And their response has been twofold. Their response has been to physically protect themselves and shut themselves off from threat, which is normal and reasonable. But I also think that they have shut themselves off from threat emotionally and spiritually. And that is the balancing act. Yes, security is reasonable. Security is mandated. But we do have to go into a rational and calm process where we sit down with experts and assess the real risks. The risks of Jews being targeted in anti-Semitic attacks are still pretty minute, especially compared to the violence faced by people of color. And, you know, I want us Jews to stand with that in absolute solidarity. This is not about one minority stealing the limelight of another minority, God forbid. The violence against people of color is far more pronounced in the Western world, not just America, the Western world, right? But yes, it is reasonable to be in discussion with our Jewish institutions and security experts and law enforcement in terms of what we can concretely do. But that is actually a short-term solution. I really hope that we can prevent that from becoming the new normal, because in Europe it has become the new normal. In Europe you cannot enter a synagogue for the most part. I know this from personal experience as a European Jew, unless you bring your photo ID and unless you write a letter beforehand and unless you pass the armed guard at the gate that surrounds the perimeter of the property and you go through an airlock door. How do I know this? I was the rabbi of a synagogue like that. I was the congregant of a synagogue like that. And there's something deadening about that. They're right to do it. I wouldn't say that they shouldn't. They have to protect themselves, and the threat level experienced by European Jews is significantly higher. There's no denying. And, you know, my heart goes out in sympathy and respect for the communities of Europe who have to weigh these complex judgments against each other of how they can keep people safe, but also how it affects the communal spirits at the same time. And it's heartbreaking to see the European communities, which have such wealth, Jewish richness and history and strength and resilience, to see them do that. So that is my second part of the equation. We need to double down on chesed. We need to double down on loving kindness. We need to double down on our Jewish values. And that is why the Solidarity Shabbat campaign, the hashtag Show Up for Shabbat, is so powerful, because what has the American Jewish community's response been in the face of this? We are not going to shut ourselves down. Yes, we might, you know, rely on some law enforcement or some other strategies to keep us safe and to make sure that things are monitored and, you know, to take responsibility. But ideologically, spiritually, theologically, communally, culturally, socially, we are not going to shut ourselves down. The tent of Abraham and Sarah will remain open on all four sides. Now that doesn't mean we have to do something irresponsible, but you know, it is also about the story that we write, the script that we write in our own heads as vulnerable minorities of any type. We cannot live in fear. If we live in fear, they have won. Can we be worried? Sure. But right now we need to heal and we need to mourn. We are still sitting Shiva. It's not been a week yet. We are still sitting Shiva, right? And then after we have mourned, we will get up from our period of mourning. And then we will have a different kind of conversation about the Judaism that we want to carry through into the American experience. And I charge each and every one of us as Jews or as friends to the Jewish people, and I'm so heartened to see so many friends to the Jewish people. You know, who knew we could be popular, at least in this room, in room 66. You know, to have an internalized sense of our own mission, to be mission-driven in terms of us taking responsibility and ownership for our own Judaism, and love and joy. Whatever level, if you're a secular Jew or a religious Jew, a Reformed Jew or an Orthodox Jew, a 2 days a year Jew, darn it, you gotta enjoy Yom Kippur. Right? On whatever level that you find your Judaism, empower yourself to rejoice in that choice and in that heritage. It's not a perfect solution, and I don't mean to be Pollyanna about it, but it's the only thing we've got, but it's the best thing we've got.
I want to add something to that, if you don't mind. I cannot begin to compare without eloquence, but from where I sit, given the kinds of work I do, I want to add to that a political solution. And that is that if we think of the history of Jews specifically, Jewish emancipation came through liberal democracy. Mm-hmm. Okay? Liberal democracy has a checkered history. Okay? It has a checkered history of dealing with all sorts of people who start out as outsiders, but over the history, the now multi-century history of liberal democracy, it has at least proven that it provides space for absolutely necessary conversations and necessary challenges that have resulted in the lowering of barriers of all kinds of people from a underrepresented group. Again, checkered, continuing work in progress, but in terms of systems we've got, it's the one that's proven more able to do that work in it. We live in a world, both in North America and in Europe, where liberal democracy is under threat. And I think we need to face up to that. And this is not the spiritual response. This is setting part of the necessary political context for certain kinds of discussions and certain kinds of movement to continue to happen. And I do think we need to double down and commit ourselves to protecting that context.
Let me also speak to the solution of what can non-Jews do to contribute to this. I said some of this at the synagogue on Sunday. I'm giving a series. I'm teaching at the synagogue on Sunday, and I said some of this there, but I want to say it again because it's important. I was raised with every amount of white privilege that a big, tall, able-bodied, straight white male who was raised Christian can experience. I experienced, no one is suspicious of me when I walk into a grocery store or when I walk anywhere. I'm all of the privilege that there is, with the exception of being wealthy. I have experienced.
You chose academia.
Yeah, I chose academia. I teach in the humanities. But I experienced that. But even then, it is not enough for Christians or people who have no faith tradition to stand idly by and to hold the coats of others who would do these heinous things to the Jewish community. It is not enough to say, well, I'm nonpartisan, or I want to be diplomatic, or I don't want to get involved, or I don't want to really be confrontational, or that is not enough. If you choose to remain uninvolved, you have made a choice. My mother and my father taught me that when you see someone attacking someone else, you put your body in between the oppressor and the victim. As uncomfortable as that might be, as much as that might put you yourself in the danger, you have to do that. And so I think, and I call upon non-Jews in Iowa and across the country, around the world, you have to do something. If you can't speak, use your body. Stand with the Jewish community and do something. Be there for them. Stand with them. Go to the synagogue. Come to panel discussions. Go to homes. Tell them, hey, I'm here for you. I'm not Jewish, but I'm here and I'm here to support you. What can I do? That's what it's going to take. It can't be the Jewish community alone fighting this battle. It's got to be non-Jewish community in solidarity with them if this is ever going to, if we're ever going to stamp out this degree of hate.
Thank you for your honor.
Thank you so much.
My name is Libby Conley, and I work as a chaplain at the University of Iowa Hospital. And I was hoping, I was hoping that Rabbi Esther could just speak briefly about the tradition of midrash, and as a way of looking at Scripture and contrast it with biblical literalism. I think that's an important thing for people to know. Often, as a Christian myself, we usurp the Hebrew Scriptures, which is not appropriate. And so I think it's important to hear that from you.
Great, thank you. So, the Jewish interpretive tradition was the first way to be a hipster. We were postmodern before it was cool. So, and what I mean by that is that the Jewish way to read text is multi-layered, and to use a fancy academic word, here we go, Bob, intertextual, there you go, and lends itself to various voices and various interpretations. Now, for you kids out there, I feel old, the best way to describe it is that it's scriptural fan fiction, right? So, just like you would have fan fiction on Marvel Comics that would explore different aspects of the Marvel Comics universe, rabbinic writings, the rabbinic corpus of literature called Midrash, is fan fiction on the biblical corpus, right? So it asks the question, what is this text saying to me? What does this text want me to do with it? In Hebrew we say, darsheni, explain me, interpret me. I can have a living relationship with this text. I can pick this text apart. And I think what allows Jews to do this in the Jewish tradition, because we have a structured way of life that provides the anchor to the sail. The anchor is the mitzvot. Whether I am having an atheist moment or whether I am fed up of Jewish religion, I'm still not going to eat that bacon cheeseburger, at least for a while, right? Because I am part of a rhythm of Jewish living that is practical, that is embedded in my daily experience, that is earthly. And because I have this spiritual discipline, it allows me to ask some really profound and radical and sometimes subversive and antinomian questions about the text. And that gives Jews incredible freedom. And I think that is a real gift to our community, because it allows us to live with difference. And that is something that this culture sorely needs. Now, to respond to what you're saying about Christian texts usurping Jewish texts, yes, that can happen. It also depends on the Christian reading, the individual Christians reading those texts. There are also Christians that really honor the Hebrew Bible. And Christians have a right to have their own relationship with the core text, with the Hebrew Bible. It's not my place to dictate how you read Isaiah 53. I can just tell you how I read it. But in a way you can see the New Testament as midrash on the Hebrew Bible, right? We are allowed to interpret and reinterpret, and that is healthy. And I think that's actually a form of textual democracy that we can learn a lot from in this modern society.
If I can add, that's what Jesus was arguing about with the religious leaders. They were having a debate over how to interpret Hebrew Scriptures. By the way, the significance of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls We have another sect of Jews that we didn't know about prior to 1947 that wrote things that were reinterpreting the same verses that the Christians were reinterpreting. They were reinterpreting those same very popular passages, but they were attributing it to their leader, their expected messianic figures. And so this is what religions, at least in book religions, right, have been arguing about. By the way, the same is going on in the Islamic faith.
Mm-hmm.
Different schools of Islamic thought wrestling over what does the verse mean in the Quran. And they wrestle and they fight amongst themselves and they argue. Sometimes they become violent amongst themselves, trying to interpret this, right? The hermeneutics, right? How does one interpret Scripture properly? Do you bring into account the various traditions of interpretation within the Jewish and or the Christian tradition? Or do you say sola scriptura, right?
Yeah.
Only the text, no interpretation, whatever it says. But even sola scriptura allows the reader to say, well, here's what it means to me.
It's violence. It's a form of violence
Yeah.
against the text. You are flattening the text like a pancake.
And you're
when
saying, that's right, and you're saying all of that rich tradition, whether it's the Jewish tradition or the Christian tradition, I throw it out the window. I want to start over from scratch. And unfortunately, this is what fundamentalism does. It just ignores the fact that there's a rich interpretive tradition, and it says, I want to start over with whatever I think this text says.
It's hermeneutical narcissism.
I'm going to let her be the scholar here. No, that's exactly what it is. She's not wrong. That's exactly what it is. It is this notion that whatever I think the text says, that's what it says, and I'm going to act on it that way. The rest of whatever my faith has told me for 2,000 years, be damned. That's a good term. I'm going to steal that from you. Okay.
I just want to point out that as a historian, you are also doing that textual criticism. To go from the French Revolution to Dreyfus.
Yes.
An amazing leap. And, you know,
Yeah.
you probably do it in your classes all the time.
That's
but,
right.
You know, I get up to 1,500 and I stop.
I was very happy when Rob moved from the sort of 3-digit chronology and got us into the 4 digits. We got us into the 1400s, from the first century to the second. Yeah. But indeed, I mean, the fact is, this layering of interpretation happened through history. And the people, this was done by human beings, living in communities, living in society, taking ancient texts, taking previous interpretations, reinterpreting in light of the world around them in conversation with those prior incarnations of the community, right? So this happens through history. This is not just text and then another text and another text. This happens in human communities who live real lives. This community might be having to create commentary in light of recently having been expelled. They're going to bring that experience to what they layer on top of it. This community might be creating some kind of commentary in light of some recent obnoxious papal edict, right? They're gonna try to work it out, right? So all of this happens through history. So thank you for the plug for the historians.
I have a question, but I defer if there are students.
Yes.
No, please, go ahead.
Well, I've been thinking somewhat differently. I've been thinking about our community as a university community, as a community of learning. And I want to observe that, by way of opening, that I thought this panel and this discussion, the panel especially, went straight to my heart because that's what a university should be doing. This is what we make space for. I happen to be in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when in 2002 or 3, when we invaded Iraq, and students, everyone was on streets and demonstrations, but one community at Harvard sent out a message which said, we encourage everybody to go to the Harvard bookstore and buy a copy of Hannah Arendt on revolution, and we will gather anyone at the university who wants to discuss these issues at such and such a place, at such and such a time, and there were hundreds of people, and a panel like yours to start people off thinking. And I thought then, and I thought today, this is what we are about. And in that, and I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but this is my thought. When and my gray hair, when I was in college, the people who took liberal arts, whether they were going to be scientists or poets, took required courses in a core curriculum. And one piece of the core curriculum was what was then called Western Civ. And in the Western Civ, because everybody took it, you read some great texts. You started off. You read some of the biblical writings, and after some years after I was around, they also did some Eastern civilization and Islamic stuff. There were no women in the text that my husband read at Columbia, but there are women in these core curricula now. And so we could count on people in our community having some shared reading. And the most moving graduation address I ever heard of, I wasn't there, but I read the text, was when the former president of the University of Iowa, Jim Friedman, he was president in the 1980s, he went from here to be president of Dartmouth. And while he was at Dartmouth, he was stricken with a cancer. From that cancer, he recovered. At the end of the year, there was an interim president. He got up to give the graduation speech at the end. And he said, when I was in college, they gave me all these things to read, these classic things. I read Roman things. I read Greek texts. So they said they were furnishing my mind. And now that when I was ill, he was a very brilliant lawyer. He had clerked with Thurgood Marshall. He said when I was ill, I couldn't read anything about the law. When I was ill, I couldn't read about university governance. When I was ill, fiction seemed frivolous. When I was ill, I read the Stoics. And they were meaningful to me. And it strikes me as I listen to all this, that we don't furnish, we have all these electives, and we give people areas that they can choose and enjoy, but we don't have, our minds are not similarly furnished. So when you referred to the Gospels, I didn't know there were so many Gospels. And we don't have those shared knowledges that at this moment might help us greatly. And I'm wondering whether that is also some work in the long run for institutions and communities like ours to think about. What do we want to know together that then we can draw on?
May I respond to that? Because I don't only think that this is the responsibility of academia, because we have to, remember that there are a lot of people who are not in academia and who may never have been in academia. This is a personal responsibility for all of us to become critical readers. The other day, I had a few tabs open on my phone. One was from a right-wing online magazine, and one was from a left-wing online magazine, and I was reading different perspectives on the same issue. The internet, a great blessing, has allowed us to become really siloed. We select everything. We select the food we eat, we select the online shopping we do, we select the social media and the other media that we consume. And we are losing a shared culture. If you couple that to secularization trends, the nuns, like not nuns as in a religious order, but nuns as in N-O-N-E-S. And as a European, I can glimpse a little bit in the future. What has become Europe's biggest existential challenge is not that people don't believe in God. I don't care whether people do or do not believe in God, but that we have lost a civilized shared language to talk about these issues and to know how to live with purpose, even if it is a humanistic sense of purpose. And I think that process is now starting in the United States. You know, if you read Pew report after Pew report, the demographics seem to back that up. And we can still put the brake on that. Not the brake in terms of how people choose to affiliate, that's their choice, but to ask as a culture, where do we want to go and what do we want our shared experiences to be, and to bring it right down to the individual for each and every one of us to talk to the other side. I have a dentist who is not my political, you know, we don't agree on politics. And I love talking to him about how he feels and how he has arrived at his worldview. And that those, you know, I had 2 root canals, so they've become really meaningful though one-sided conversations. Right? So that it goes from the macro but also to the micro. Please stop the closing of the mind and read broadly and critically.
And I appreciate I actually think this conversation layers very nicely on the conversation of Midrash and criticism, because I think that, in a sense, the sort of shared corpus of literature around the required Western Civ course at one time lent a sense of what is core knowledge. I think if we were to try to develop a sense of core knowledge now, it might not be Western civilization. Yeah. There's good reason that the academy has moved around that. But again, the notion that, well, who are we now? What are the issues facing society? Who is part of the large community? And what kind of conversations do we need to have so we all have some kinds of common reference and common frames for thinking? And I realize, I see Professor Kerber saying, "Oh no, I didn't mean that," which I understand.
No.
But I agree. So yes, and I think,
At Columbia, they had
exactly.
They had literature and humanities.
Yes,
I think
so I think that in some ways, right, it's a healthy conversation. How does just as with sort of discussion of sacred texts that needs to evolve, how does discussion of history, how does the discussion of literature, how does that need to evolve? Not just so we can check off college credits or high school credits for those who don't go to university, but so we create a civic sphere that is meaningful and functional. Yes. Let me just ask, yes.
Well, this was a perfect setup for what I want to ask about. So Gerald Carter, the Poli-Sci Graduate Department.
Right.
Given the current atmosphere of things, and given the fact that anti-Semitism is this sort of origin myth for so many other prejudiced narratives, is there any thinking or plan here at University of Iowa to introduce or reintroduce anti-Semitism into the curriculum, or create some kind of center, sort of like ISCA at Bloomington, specifically to try to focus on anti-Semitism or prejudice in general?
Let me say something. Oh, do you want to?
I was going to say, the part of the lecture, now this was a little expanded version, but what you saw tonight from me is a module that I have taught before in my Judaism, Christianity, and Islam section, and you also get a part of it in my History of Jerusalem course. So I am teaching this, since I teach Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity here at the university, I want to make sure that my students understand the roots of some of this. Now, it's, when I taught, when Jay Holstein stopped teaching this course, and I was asked to step in for, this is the worst thing I've ever had to do in my life, step in for Jay Holstein to teach Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? He's a legend here. But when I did that, I made sure to include that module on the origins of anti-Semitism, because I wanted that taught. Now, what we're doing beyond that, I think it would be important to follow up.
Yeah, and I too, in my classes, I teach courses on modern Europe, but particularly we have a student from my course in 20th century Germany here now. I teach courses on Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, which is not just a... I always tell my students, though, I feel some discomfort with having a curriculum or even teaching about anti-Semitism before we've had an opportunity to teach about Judaism.
And may I segue into that? So,
And we don't have that.
But we
Yes.
do.
Yes.
We do.
Okay.
So I teach something called an Introduction to Judaism course, which is very consciously called an Introduction to Judaism course, because it is not just a conversion course. It can lead to conversion for those who want to convert, but Jews, non-Jews, people who are already members of the community, anyone can join the course. I'll be launching a new one in January, so keep your eyes peeled on the Agudas Achim website. The synagogue, if you Google synagogue, Coralville Synagogue, Iowa City, we will be launching that, and anyone is welcome to join that course. I have some of my students from the course here, and that is, it's a non-academic course. It's very much learning of life. But we will be engaging with some deep ideas, and you're absolutely right. Come learn about Judaism first. What happens with anti-Semitism is that it reduces Judaism to a caricature, to something victimized. We have a beautiful and proud tradition, and come check it out.
Any final? Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me just add.
Yes.
One of the reasons that there isn't a Judaism course. We do have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I do teach the intro. I teach religions in a global context. And the first thing I like to start easy and then work up. This is it's basically a world religions course that looks at religious conflict. And we like to start easy and work up. So we start with Israel and Palestine, and then we work our way up from there. But what I try to do in that course is to introduce the core tenets of each of the religious traditions. So it's by no means a theological introduction to Judaism, but I try to introduce basically the basic tenets of the faith. Here's the text, here are the basic tenets. But I do this for Judaism, for Christianity, for Islam, in all of these courses. But if you're looking for a deeper introduction to that, I teach Hebrew on campus, biblical Hebrew, biblical Aramaic, the languages, so that you can have the tools to do that. And also we teach biblical Greek and we teach Koine. We also teach classical Greek. So the tools are there to learn these things. But then, of course, if we could work in conjunction with the synagogue, if we can work in conjunction with the mosque, with some of the Christian community here, I think that's the best way to have the critical study of the religion, and to say we also promote the study of the confessional side of this. Yeah.
Last time I checked, you're the only school that does not have a Jewish studies program.
That doesn't have a
Jewish studies program.
Jewish studies program.
Only the kids group.
As someone who teaches, Jay Holstein is still teaching here, and is the only person that teaches Second Temple Judaism, I would welcome a Jewish studies program.
Rabbi Portman, now that you're retired.
What are you doing on Monday?
I don't mean to interrupt, but this is a job not for the community. This is a challenge to people in this university who are active members of its faculty and of its student body. How did we get women's studies? We got women's studies back in the 70s in antiquity because the students insisted on it. And that was true all over the country. In Iowa, it was easy because our then president, Sandy Boyd, who is still alive and still thinking, thought that was a wonderful thing to do. In other places, they sat in the president's office, they persuaded faculty, and the women's studies, things that you see in this university are the work of the students. It's the work of the faculty and the students who will say, why are we the only Big Ten university not to have it? Because as faculty lines get available, they get to find for other needs. And so it's doable, but it has to come from the heart.
I would certainly welcome more colleagues.
Absolutely.
And I will say that Second Temple was a long time ago.
That's right. No,
There's a
and
lot more to talk about.
To be sure, as a historian of the origin of Judaism, that's wonderful. But it might be nice to have someone besides Professor Holstein who's trying to retire. And we keep dragging him back. He's trying to retire.
It's like a Jewish goodbye.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a couple of other colleagues to hand that off to.
Are
And
there-
I think it's doable.
Let me just ask if there are any other questions, again, particularly from students who would like to introduce anything into the conversation. And if not, we'll take one final question from Professor Berger.
It's not a question,
Or
but
comment.
a commendation on such a wonderful event. I want to actually, I want to congratulate myself for having been at least indirectly involved in the hiring of all three of you. I think that we're happy that Iowa City is a place where thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you.
Have a good night. Thank you so much.
The presentation was so lucid. It was great.